Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi Batra, 1 week at a time. This is our 7th class in Masechet Batra, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 44 through 50. Now, we actually ended off last week on a cliffhanger, and I'm sure you all remember what we were talking about. But if you don't remember, I'm going to review the case. It was actually a little complicated. The case was that, and again, we'll use some names. Reuven stole land from Shimon, and then he sold it to Levi. Then Yehuda comes and he says, how come you have this land? It's actually mine. So now, Shimon, he's the original owner. He can't testify that the land is Levi's, right? And why would he do that? So that he can afterwards go to Levi and say, hey, now give it back to me because really it's mine, right? So we don't believe him because he is only testifying for Levi so that he can go get his land back from him, not because it's true. And then so that's why we don't believe Shimon and we don't let him testify. So that was the end of last week. So this week, Daf 44 asks the question, right? Does Shimon gain if he testifies for Levi? Right? What is the reason that we're not letting him testify? It seems that he gains. So the Gemara continues and says, in the second part of that Braita, there's a conversation about a person who sold a cow, and then they changed the domain where the cow is, again because he sold it. So Shimon can't get it back, and therefore, Shimon can't get it back. Therefore, he can testify because it's already somebody else's. But in our case with the land, he can still get the land back from Levi. Therefore, what's the issue? And if you remember, we did mention this last week. We say that in Hebrew, the phrase is, he is nogea b'davar. Nogea b'davar means he has a bias, right? Like a judge will recuse themselves when they have some sort of connection to, one of the people in the court. So here too, Shimon has a bias because he really wants to claim that it was his land, and therefore we don't allow him to testify for Levi because he has like vested interest. Now, if someone inherits a stolen item, they're not responsible to return it. Thank you. Conflict of interest. Thank you very much. That was what I was looking for. If someone inherits a stolen item, they're not responsible to return it because they're not the person who stole it. But if the person stole it and then they sold it, so then you have to give it back because that's not okay. Okay. Now the Gemara says really we should have said the land will come back to him, or not. Right? We were talking about him going to get his land back. And the Gemara says that's really not the word we want to use. The word is achrayut. Achrayut means, is there a guarantee on the land? So the Gemara says, let's give another case. Rather, what's the case? The case is that Shimon sold land to Reuven without a guarantee. Again, if you remember, when you sell a piece of land, you want to know, are you guaranteeing me that if someone comes and takes this land from me because you owe them money, right? Because there's a lien on the land. So then if I have achrayut, if I have a warranty or guarantee, you say that you're going to replace the land if it's seized. if you don't have the achrayut, if you don't have the guarantee, that's this case here, right? So Reuven sells the land to Shimon sells land to Reuven without a guarantee. Shimon also owes money to Levi, right? So now Yehuda comes and claims that the land is his. Now, Shimon is not allowed to testify against Yehuda because really he wants the land to stay with Reuven, right? Again, sorry for all the people, but the point is Shimon wants the land to stay where it is because when Levi comes to collect the land, he's going to take it from Reuven, and Shimon does not have to replace that field. So he has a conflict of interest. And therefore, Shimon, the original owner, is not allowed to be a witness in this case. Now, the Gemara adds, this is specifically in a field or a house, right? Because again, that's where you're going to collect a debt from. But if we're talking about a movable object, right? A coat, a table, right? That's called metaltalin. Metaltalin is a movable object. Then it's not the case because again, that's not able to be collected for a loan. And therefore, if that was sold, you can testify for those items because there is no conflict of interest. Okay, next, if a borrower gives a movable object, right? Again, metaltalin and land to create collateral, right? As a collateral for a loan, it does work. And the lender does acquire the right to the land and to those movable objects, right? So if it comes together, then it could be collateral, but it can't be by itself collateral. If the borrower says anything I buy will be a lien, a lien to you, right? Again, to the lender, and then he buys something and then he sells it, it's not mortgaged, right? It's not seen as a lien to the lender because he bought it and then he sold it right away, right? It only works if he owned the land beforehand, right? So if he owned the land before he took out the loan, so then it works. But if he doesn't, so then it doesn't work. If a person sold land, again, without achrayut, without this guarantee, and it gets taken, right, it's seized because he couldn't pay back his loan, so then the seller doesn't need to return the money because, again, also you have to recognize that when someone buys a field without achrayut, without this warranty, he's getting it at a much cheaper price. So we say, look, you took a risk. You got a cheap piece of land. The owner doesn't have to return the money. But if the land was never his, so then the buyer can ask for the money back, right? And therefore the seller is, and now again, here the point is that if the seller needs to reimburse the buyer, so then back to our testifying case, the seller doesn't want the land to be taken away from the buyer because he doesn't want to have to pay him back the money. Therefore, he is a conflict of interest, and therefore the original owner cannot testify about this property. Okay. Daf 45, if a borrower has other land that the lender can seize, so the Gemara asks, why can't the borrower testify about this land? Again, don't forget, when a person owes money, they go to the borrower and they say, okay, pay me $100. The borrower says, I don't have $100. So they look at the contract and they see what land was set aside as collateral for this loan, and the lender goes and seizes the land. Now, again, if there is other land available, so then they can take that land. They're not going to go to land that was sold to somebody else. That's too complicated. So as long as there's another piece of land in the borrower's possession, so then the owner is allowed to testify about the other piece of land. Or maybe not, right? Meaning the Gemara asks, why can't the borrower testify about that land? Right? Because again, it's not a conflict of interest because he has another piece of land. So it seems that maybe that would be okay. Or no, right? Because Reuven is still going to be upset that the field is seized, right? He doesn't want the field to be taken, and therefore he's still going to be upset. Okay, next case. It's going to get easier, but you have to bear with us for a little bit longer. Reuven sold a donkey to Shimon. Now, a non-Jew walks by Shimon's property and he takes the donkey and he says, this is actually my donkey. Why do you have it? I'm taking it. So now, Reuven, again, Reuven was the original owner. Reuven needs to try and get the donkey back for the buyer, but he doesn't need to reimburse Shimon because he sold it to him. But there's no like guarantee. But he does need to help him to show that he's trying to be a nice guy. But if Shimon recognized the donkey as being the offspring of Reuven's donkey, apparently you can tell. I don't know enough about animals. I thought that, I don't know. I guess they don't all look alike, but let's pretend you can prove that it's Reuven's donkey, right? So if you can prove that Reuven owned it, so then Reuven doesn't need to help Shimon get it back because Shimon knows that it's Reuven, meaning the non-Jew is obviously lying. So Shimon has to deal with the non-Jew who's obviously lying. But if we're not sure if he's lying, so then Reuven has to help him. Okay, let's say the non-Jew took the donkey and the saddle, right? So now Reuven doesn't need to help him because obviously he's a thief, right? Because he's taking everything and it's very clear that he's just stealing. Again, what does that mean? It's between Shimon and the thief. It has nothing to do with Reuven, right? Again, the question is who really owns the donkey? So the Gemara is saying if the non-Jew took the donkey with everything that was on it, it's very clear that the non-Jew is lying. If he only takes the donkey, so then maybe he's telling the truth. Okay, let's move on to another case, which we mentioned last week, and this is about the craftsman. Right? A craftsman gets items to fix, to repair, to make. And we said last week that he's not allowed to create a chazaka, meaning he can't say, oh, I've had this coat for 3 years. Oh, so it proves that I own it. No, right? I gave you the coat because I asked you to fix it. So what we're going to see for the rest actually of today is that if someone has permission to have the item or to be on the property, they can't create a chazaka because the owner allowed them to be on the property. It's only when they're not allowed to be on the property that if they're on the property, it proves that they bought it. So we'll go through all of these scenarios. So the craftsman, if an item was given to him in front of witnesses, right, he can't make a chazaka because the owner has proof that he gave it to him to fix or to make. But if there weren't witnesses, if the craftsman says, listen, I bought that coat from you. You didn't give it to me to be fixed. I bought it from you. So then he's believed because there were no witnesses. It's he said, he said. And it seems, we'll see as we go through, that in those days, you went to the craftsman not only to make something or to fix something for you, but sometimes also to sell an item for you, right? So, right, a lot of people go to the craftsman, let's say, well, we can use a tailor, right? So they go to the tailor for a new jacket, and you have a jacket and you say, you know what? I don't really want this jacket anymore. Can you see if you can sell it for me? So we're going to see that, right, the craftsman could truthfully say, oh, you gave it to me, like to sell, right? Not you gave it to me to fix and to give back to you. And again, we'll see this more clearly. So let's keep going. So it seems that a lot of this was done in front of witnesses. So that, again, nowadays we have receipts, right? You might have like a camera, right? They didn't have those things in those days. So how do you know who's telling the truth? So here it seems that a lot of things were done, again, either in front of witnesses or with a document. But don't forget, it's very difficult to have a document. Not everybody wrote. It's expensive to write. It's not like everyone has a pad of paper and a pen. So we have to understand things are much more complicated in those days. Okay, one second. Okay, so back to the craftsman. Now we're going to say that there are two sets of witnesses. The original witnesses say the owner gave this item to the craftsman to fix, right? I gave you my coat. There was a hole in the coat. I want you to fix it. A second pair of witnesses come and they say, I saw this item by the craftsman, right? By the tailor. Now, as long as we have this second set of witnesses, you can't make a chazaka because we don't believe that he bought it. It could just be that it was there to be fixed. Or if you don't have the first set, so then you could establish a chazaka because we don't know why the tailor has the coat. Maybe he bought it. Maybe it was there to be fixed. So Rabba doesn't care about the second pair of witnesses. He cares about the first pair. Let's say a third person has an item and he says, you told again, let's call it the tailor, right? You told the tailor to sell the coat and give it to me. So then we believe him, right? We believe that third person, like a third party, to say, I was there, I heard you tell him that he could sell it to me. If you have only the second set of witnesses, meaning the current witnesses, maybe you don't need, again, the original witnesses. And the Gemara says, no, we need both. We need to know when you dropped it off, what did you say? And we need to know what's happening right now. If you deposit, again, the item with witnesses, so then you need to return it with witnesses, or maybe not necessarily. Again, maybe you don't need a current set of witnesses, only the first set. So now the tailor says, you said you're going to pay me $2. And the owner says, what are you talking about? I agreed to $1, right? So again, he said, right? If the item is still with the tailor, so then the owner needs to bring a proof of that you agreed to one, right? We can say $10, let's say, right? But if the coat is already with the owner, so then he needs to pay, if the coat is still by the tailor, so then the owner needs to bring proof, and if he can't bring proof, he needs to pay $2, right? Because it's in the possession of the tailor. If the tailor gave it back to the owner, so then the tailor claims his wage on that day, right? He returns it and he says, okay, now give me back my $20 or pay me $20. Remember we said, I don't know if you remember, we said that if a worker demands payment on the day that the payment is due, we believe that they're telling the truth. Because, right, again, don't forget, let's say we have this actually in a case of like a farmer, right? If a farmer has numerous workers, he can't necessarily remember how much everybody is owed. And if you say, listen, we had a deal that you're going to pay me 20, we believe the worker. But so what happens? The craftsman takes an oath, right? He swears that you told me you're going to pay me two, and then he gets two. But if he claims it a week later, right, he returns the coat, and then he says, listen, I gave you back the coat last week. You owe me $20. The owner is going to say, no, you prove to me that I owe you $20. Otherwise, I'm paying you 10. Okay, so that's important to know. Now, why don't we ask the witnesses how much, right? How much is owed? So it seems that there aren't any witnesses. And it seems that even when there were no witnesses, we still we believe the craftsman or the owner based on, again, as I said, depending on when this conversation is happening. Okay, Daf 46. Okay, let's say there are no witnesses at all. Nobody saw any interaction, not even now. Then the tailor has, he has, again, he has what's called, if you remember, we learned the concept of migo, right? The tailor could have said, right, oh, I bought it. But instead he's saying, okay, no, right, you owe me this amount. So we believe the uman, the craftsman. Now we said that the craftsman cannot make a chazaka, right? He can't establish proof of ownership just by having the item. But if you have a parallel case of giving an item to another person, right? Let's say you lent your, I don't know, a bowl to your neighbor. And there were no witnesses, so you can make a chazaka. But it seems, right, the craftsman cannot make a chazaka. So now we're going to discuss this. We'll continue, right? So let's say, now a new case. Let's say a garment was switched at the tailor, right? Let's say you gave in a black coat to get fixed. You go to pick up your coat, the tailor gives you back a black coat, and you get home and you're like, this is not mine, right? So then you can use that black coat, right, till the owner comes and picks it up from your house. But if you, right, let's say you went to shul and you went to shul, you saw a black coat and you took it home, and it turns out you took the wrong coat. So you're not allowed to use that coat, right? Once you realize that it's not yours because you didn't take it with permission, right? But what's the case with the tailor? And here's what I was mentioning before. Again, in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, sometimes people tell the tailor, listen, I'm trying to sell this coat. So do you think you can sell it for me? So then, right, maybe he sold the wrong garment and he gave him a different coat, but he had permission to sell it, and therefore you can use it. Now, the Gemara also says this is as long as you say, take this garment, but meaning as long as the tailor says that. But if he says, here is your garment, then it seems that he's implying that it's yours. And then you're not allowed to use it because it's not yours. So then, interestingly, the Gemara speaks about ways that people people in society cheat other people. So it says, right, what's the case, right? So someone says, let me tell you how these people are cheaters. What do? Right? A person comes to the tailor and he says, give me my coat. And the tailor says, what are you talking about? You never gave me a coat. And then Reuven brings witnesses who say, oh, I saw a black coat over there. Right? They don't say I saw your coat, but they say, like, I say it's a black coat, and they're like, oh yeah, I saw a black coat over there. So Reuven tells the tailor, okay, listen, you don't believe me? Fine, bring out that black coat. Let's check. Right? I have my name in it. Let's check. So the tailor, again, the tailor is the cheater, because really he does have his black coat and he's just lying. But the tailor can say, oh, listen, I protect the rights of all my customers. I'm not showing you, you know, John's coat, right? I don't, you don't have any right to demand to see a coat. It's not yours. Therefore, I'm not showing it to you. And this is a way for the tailor to cheat, right? And basically steal Ruvain's coat. Um, but interestingly enough, uh, one of the sages in the Gemara says, wait a minute, that's actually the right thing to do because why should the tailor show him another coat, right? It's not his, so why should he show it to him? So what should Reuven do? Reuven should say, you know what, do me a favor, show me the coat because really I know it's my coat and really you just want to make money. So let's bring me the coat. Maybe I owe you more money, right? Like, so like it's saying like, maybe I'll pay you more, show me the coat. And then you see it and you're like, haha, it's mine, right? But then maybe that would work and you could see it. Okay, that was the craftsman. Let's go to the sharecropper. If you remember, a sharecropper is a person, a farmer that is hired to work the field, and he pays the owner of the field based on the produce that is harvested. Again, either with a set percentage or a set percentage or sorry, either with a set percentage of whatever the harvest is or a certain amount. But what's the point? The sharecropper is obviously on the field. So obviously the owner lets him be on the field. So how could he say, oh, I own this land. Didn't you see me working it for 3 years? That doesn't work because the owner lets him be there for 3 years. Um, so the Gemara says, wait a minute, why can't we say, look, he's harvesting the whole field, right? And generally the sharecropper only harvested a portion of the field. So the Gemara says, no, there are different types of sharecroppers. There was something called like almost like an ancestral sharecropper, which means this person's family has been working on the estate for many years, right? Think about like, you know, in England, right? They like lived on the property for years and years and many generations. So if you're there for so many years, sometimes they said, okay, in the first 3 years, you harvest all the land, and in the next 3 years, you know, you harvest it and you give it to me. So just because he's there harvesting the whole field doesn't mean he owns the field. Okay. So now the share. Let's see what's with the sharecropper. Can the sharecropper give testimony? Again, we're going back to the beginning of our shiur, right? When we were talking about being right, having a conflict of interest. Can you be a witness? So can the sharecropper give testimony for the owner of the land? On one hand, he's not the owner, therefore, you know, what does he care? And he can give testimony. Or no, he benefits from the land and therefore, right, he wants the owner to keep the land and therefore he cannot be a witness. So the Gemara says, yes, he can give testimony when the field was already harvested. But if it wasn't harvested yet, so then he can't testify because again, he has a conflict of interest. Okay, now we have 4 cases of people who can or can't give testimony. And the Gemara, very interestingly, gives us a way to remember these 4 cases. If you remember, when we're learning the Talmud, right? The Talmud is called the oral law, right? The oral Torah, Torah shebe'al peh, because most of these things were memorized. So if they were memorized, the rabbis wanted to give like mnemonics, ways to remember different things. So here, the siman, right, the sign or the symbol to remember is Amalek. Amalek is Ayin Mem Lamed Amalek. Ayin Mem Lamed Kuf. So those are going to be the first letters of these four cases. Okay, so Ain is arev. Arev is a guarantor. Okay, so a guarantor, again, what's a guarantor? Someone who signs right on a loan document that if the borrower can't pay back, I vouch for them. Okay, and we'll see what that means. So the guarantor can give testimony for the borrower, but only if the borrower has another field for collection, right? We want to make sure that the borrower has a way to pay back the loan. So if he can pay back the loan, then the guarantor is off the hook. Therefore, he doesn't have a conflict of interest. Therefore, he can be a witness. Next, mem, Amalek, mem, malve, a malve, that's a lender. A lender is allowed to testify on behalf of the borrower, again, that he owns certain land, again, only if he has another field that he can collect from. Because again, he has a vested interest that this borrower should have a field. But if there's another field, so then it's okay. Okay, then, okay, now it's the love, right? This is, this, one second, malve, right. Love is okay, what's this case? There's two sets of buyers, right? The first, right, there was a first buyer of land that had a lien on it, so he can testify for the second buyer as long as the second buyer has, again, as long as he has another land from Reuven, again, as we said, as long as there's another piece of land, he can testify. And the last one is Kuf Amalek. Kuf is Kablan. A Kablan is not in the modern Hebrew. A Kablan is a contractor. But here, a Kablan is a guarantor, but a more invested guarantor than the Arev. Arev seems to be, or again, the first case that we had, seems to be somebody who is testifying to the person's character. Like, I believe Reuven is a good guy. He's going to pay back your loan. But I don't really think that you're going to come to my house and collect $100. But the Kabbalan, he is like invested in the sense that if Reuven can't pay back the loan, you can come to my house and I'll pay you the $100. So for the Kabbalan, he can, or maybe he cannot testify for the borrower, because again, the lender can go to him to get the land or the field or the money, and therefore there is a conflict of interest. Okay, Daf 47. Back to our tailor, to the craftsman. We said he can't make a chazaka, but his son can, right? So too, the son of the sharecropper can also make a chazaka, right? A thief and his son cannot make a chazaka. Remember, because we were talking about if something is stolen, right? If they're all claiming that they got land from their father, wait a minute, no one should be able to make a chazaka because we don't know if it belonged to the father. So it has to be that there were witnesses that say that the original owner sold it to the father, right? So we know that it was the father's, and then they inherited it. Therefore, you're believed, but not with the thief, because we don't believe the thief, we don't believe the son, and it doesn't work. Okay, sometimes the grandson cannot make a chazaka. Again, if it's based on the statement of the grandfather, if the grandfather is a thief, because again, we don't believe him. Again, this robber stole a field, and again, we say you cannot make a chazaka on this field, but Okay. Okay. Now let's go back to our craftsman. If the craftsman decides, you know what, I don't want to be a tailor anymore. I'm, going into investment banking, right? So then he can make a chazaka on the black coat, right? Because the investment banker is not supposed to have a black coat in their house, right? So if he has it, the same thing with the sharecropper. If the sharecropper is no longer employed by the owner of the field, so then he can make a chazaka. Now, let's say we have a son who got married, or right, and he leaves his father's house, or a woman got divorced. They're allowed to make a chazaka because they're no longer connected to the owner of the field. Um, but right, again, if we're not sure, right, if they're semi still connected to the person, meaning the wife to the husband or the son to the father, they cannot make a chazaka. Okay, if any one of these people that we just mentioned brings proof that they bought this item, right, either with witnesses or a document, they can make a chazaka. Remember, we said Chazaka is only if you don't have the document. But if you have the document that shows that you bought the land, so great, you bought the land or the coat or whatever it is. But with a robber, even with proof, he cannot create a chazaka because we don't believe him. We assume maybe it's forged, and therefore we don't believe him. Okay, if the robber says that he bought the field, again, we don't believe him to keep the land, but if he says I bought it, the original owner needs to reimburse him if he paid for the land. Meaning, if he has to give back the land, if he paid for it, you need to give back the money. Okay, now we have a statement which I think is fascinating. I mean, it's all fascinating, but this is as well. The Gemara says that if you're forced to sell something, that sale is valid. Okay? Now, again, I don't think it means if I hold up a gun to your head, it's not the same thing. But I think it means you didn't want to sell something, but the person coerced you to do it. It's a valid sale, maybe even at gunpoint. We'll see. Because most times, right? Again, don't forget, we're talking about I mean, maybe even nowadays, right? Most people don't want to sell land, right? If you have a piece of land, right, especially if it's something that's been passed down for generations, you don't want to sell it. Why do you sell it? Because you have to, you need money, right? So basically what the Gemara is saying is, in general, when you're selling something, especially land, it's because you're coerced in a certain way, right? You're feeling pressure. Financial pressure is coercion. And therefore, it's a valid sale. Okay. However, the Gemara says, well, maybe there's a difference. If I feel, internally that I don't have a choice, that's very different than someone else, beating me up to sell my land, right? That's very different. Okay, Daf 48. So we're going to try to bring a proof of other cases where you're forced to do something and it's still valid. So the first case is when you bring a sacrifice, right? If you are obligated to bring a sacrifice, let's say you did something wrong and now you have to bring a sin offering, we force the person to bring that. We have a concept in Hebrew. The concept is kofino to ad sheyomar rotze ani. Right? We force the person till he says, okay, I want to do it. You're right, I want to do it. Right? Because we know deep down inside, a person wants to atone for their sins, even though it's, maybe expensive and it's annoying and I don't want to go to Jerusalem and it's so far. But really, I know deep down you want to do it. But the Gemara says that's not the same thing as a sale, right? You definitely want to atone for your sins. That's not the same thing as selling your land. So maybe that's not a proof. If you remember, we had this when we were learning about the get, right? That we force the husband to give the get because we say, really, he wants to listen to the rabbis, right? It's just his like yetzer hara that's not letting him do the right thing. But we say, again, that's very different than a sale. And then we say, no, maybe there's no proof from something else. Maybe it's just logical that in the end, if you're being paid for something, so then it's a valid sale, right? Again, if someone steals it from you, obviously you're not giving it up. That's not valid. But if someone's giving you, $100, so you got money from it, so it works. And since we're talking about the get, we say that if a get is forced from a Jewish court, it's valid. But if it's a non-Jewish court, it's invalid. But the Jewish court is allowed to hire like non-Jewish, enforcers to coerce the guy, but as long as it's coming from the Jewish court. Now the Gemara says, what's the difference? If you're forcing, you're forcing. So the Gemara says, you're right. Really, midoraita, according to the Torah, it would be valid if a non-Jewish court forced the person to give the get. But dirabanan, meaning rabbinically, the rabbi said, listen, we don't want the woman to be able to easily go to whatever court she wants, and therefore we want to keep it within the Jews, and therefore we say it's not valid. Okay. If a person was forced, again, to sell a field and he got to choose which field he could sell, so then it's a valid sale because he had a choice. So we say that it's a valid sale. And if it's a specific field, right, so then, right, if a guy's like, I want to buy this field, right, and you're like, no, 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 and he says, yes, 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 and in the end, you take the money, so maybe that is invalid. If, let's say, the guy didn't even count the money, it shows that he's really upset. Maybe then it's invalid, right? He doesn't want to sell it. But if he counts the money, you see that he's like, at least I have the money, so then it's valid. If he could have pushed the people off, right? Say, listen, come back tomorrow. Let me ask my wife. I'm not sure. If he could have done that and he didn't, so then again, the sale is valid. Or the Gemara says, no, all of these cases, it doesn't matter. They're all valid sales, even if it's like one way or another. Okay, if a man forces a woman to be betrothed to him, maybe that's valid. And of course, you should all say, no, it's not valid, right? We actually learned it. We learned that even though biblically it would be valid, the rabbi said, that is improper. You never force a woman to be betrothed to you, and therefore it is not valid, and you're not allowed to do that. Again, a person forces someone to sell something, right? Maybe it's a tree, something, whatever it is. And then, this is a case. Someone, right, forces this other person to sell a tree, and then Rabbi Barbachana comes, I think it is Barbachana, comes and he signs a moda'ah. I think we mentioned this last time. A moda'ah was a document that says, I am testifying to the fact that Reuven is being coerced into selling this item and he doesn't want to do it. This document can invalidate the sale. However, he also signs a bill of sale, like that, so-and-so sold this thing to so-and-so. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute, you can't sign both, right? Because again, a bill of sale shows that it's a real sale. A moda'ah shows that it's not a real sale. So how can the same person sign both? So the Gemara says, you're right. You can't sign both of those. But a sale document would have been valid if there was no moda'ah, right? Again, this is sign of coercion. But if there's a sign of coercion, then it is invalid. Okay, daf 49, right? You're not believed to say that both of these documents are valid. If the moda'ah, right, the sign of coercion was just verbal, and then they signed the sale document. So we don't really believe the verbal statement because you signed a document of the sale, right? Again, the shtar, the document, is believed. Or no, maybe it is believed to say that there was this moda'ah beforehand, as long as it's before the sales document. If it comes after the sale document, then it's not valid. Okay, a man, we learned last week, and now we're going to mention it here, right? A man cannot make a chazaka on his wife's property because, again, he's allowed to eat the produce from her property, right? Even if he writes to her that he won't eat from the land, he already has the rights to go there, and therefore he cannot make a chazaka. If a person writes to somebody else, I have no rights to your property. It's not a valid, I have no rights to this property, meaning as a way to give it to somebody else. It's not a valid way to give a gift. You need to give it directly, or you can say, I'm making it hefker, right? I'm saying that nobody owns this, right? So you have to know how to give a gift. A husband can say when they're engaged, I don't want to have any rights to your land. And even if he's on it for 3 years, maybe he still doesn't have a chazaka, right? Again, or he can waive his rights, but you still don't get a chazaka. You can't say that you own the land. A person can waive his rights to an inheritance that comes to him in a rabbinic way, meaning not directly. But if he already owns it, right? Meaning when a father dies, at that moment, the son automatically inherits the land. So you can't then say, no, I don't want it. Again, you can give it away, you can do what you want, but you can't say, I don't have any rights to the land if you already own it. If the husband brings real proof that he bought the wife's land, then it's valid. Remember, again, real proof trumps everything. But the wife can say, wait a minute, I didn't want to anger my husband, or I wanted to please my husband, so I sold him the land, but I didn't really want to sell him the land. So maybe it's not a valid sales document. Now, if another person buys the land from the husband and then he asks for consent from the wife, it's not valid because, again, she's going to say, listen, I don't want my husband to be mad at me, so I'll agree to whatever he said, right? So we see that the wife, we don't necessarily believe what she says, not because we don't believe her, but because we think that there's, some coercion. So the Gemara tells us there's actually 3 types of fields. One is written in the Ketuva to be paid to her, so that's her land. 2, something that's verbally designated to her. And 3, Son Barzel, that's the land that she brought into the marriage, that she gets the value of when they get divorced or when she is widowed. So now Daf 50. These 3 lands cannot be sold, right? Because they are really her property, right? Even if she agrees to it, because again, we don't believe that she really agreed to it. But all other lands, she could claim that she only agreed because of her husband, and therefore the sale document is not valid. Okay, but the property that she owns that he's allowed to eat from, if she consents to the sale, so then it's valid, and therefore, if he has proof, then it is valid. Okay, a Braita says you are not allowed to sell what's called nichsei milog. Again, that's her property that she brought into the marriage, that the husband is allowed to eat the produce, right? Why can't you sell it, right? Only if he sold it and then he died, right? Because, right, she can then go back to the person who bought it and say, slicha, that's my property. He wasn't allowed to sell it. And then she can take it back, right? If she sells it and dies, he can go back to the buyer and say, I don't know why she sold it. I have the first rights to this property. If they both sold it, so then it's valid. Or if she sold it to him, also it's valid. Or no, right? Again, you're not allowed to sell it because it's like two partners, right? She owns it and he has rights to it. Nobody has full ownership to sell it. Okay. And here the Gemara brings the a case of, right, owning, let's say, a slave, but the other person has the rights to his work. No one person has full rights to the slave, right? The same thing here with the property of the wife and the husband. Now, what should the wife do? The wife needs to make a claim if someone is on her property, right? She needs to say, excuse me, you need to get off my property. This is my property. But she can say, wait a minute, I didn't make a claim because I thought my husband was going to do it, right? Meaning he's the one who's harvesting everything. Therefore, a stranger can never make a chazaka on her property because she can say, I thought the husband was going to make a claim for me. Rather, right, she needs to make a claim against the husband. She needs to make sure everyone realizes this is her property. He's allowed to use it, but it doesn't mean that he owns it. It's still hers, right? Because, right, if he, let's say he's digging pits on her property, he's not allowed to do that. And we mentioned this in the beginning of the Masechet, but we'll learn it later on as well. If someone damages property, you don't have to make a claim. Now, what does that mean? Obviously, they're not allowed to damage property that doesn't belong to them, or the opposite. If they're damaging property, it proves that they own it, because why would a stranger be allowed to damage property? It must be that it's theirs. Or maybe it depends on the type of damage. If it's like basic damage, you can make a chazaka with it. And we're going to learn that later on in the Masechet. Or back to the wife, she does have to make a claim against the stranger, right? Maybe he was there with the husband, and for 3 years after he died, right? Then he can say, listen, the husband sold it to me, so that's why I have it. He's believed if he's been there for 3 years after the husband died, right? She needed to make a claim as soon as the husband died. Listen, guys, I just want you to know this property is mine. And therefore, the Gemara concludes at the top of 51, you can make a chazaka on a married woman's property, and that's only if the husband died, and therefore the wife should be very careful to, make claims to her property if it is hers. Okay, we are going to stop here. I'm going to open it up for conversation/questions, but I do want to say next week we are having class on Tuesday night. I'm really sorry about all these changes in the summer, but the summer is complicated. But so next week is going to be the same time, but it's going to be on Tuesday night. So I will send out an email, but just if you can put it on your calendars. Okay, yes, questions. Wait, no, you're muted.
Okay, there I am. This question is predicated on your response. Is that mnemonic that you chose to remember the four, whatever it was, the land or the whatever?
Yeah.
Was that yours or is it in the Talmud?
In the Talmud.
Now the question is, don't you think it's rather strange that we pick a word that sounds like Amalek, when we're supposed to have it stricken from our memory, and now it's in the Talmud and we're always going to remember it?
Actually, it's the opposite, right? So we say, right, timche et zech, right? You have strike, but we also say zachor, right? We have a mitzvah to remember and never forget what Amalek did to us. And therefore, it's actually a brilliant thing, because it's saying, right, you're not going to forget Amalek, so you're also not going to remember these 4 cases. Okay. You're not going to forget these 4 cases.
It's
No, but it was not mine.
burned
It's
into
in
my
the tome.
brain. It's burned into my brain now. Don't worry.
Excellent. Excellent.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments, questions?
Interesting.
Okay.
Oh, and
Amazing.
I think Reuven should get a new tailor. He's a gonif. The whole thing is crazy.
About what?
I said Reuven should get a new tailor. The tailor is a gonif.
Exactly. That tailor, watch out. But I think about it, like with the dry cleaners, like, oh, you didn't give it in, or like you see it coming around and you're like, oh, I recognize it. That's my neighbor's dress, right? So like, I was thinking about that. But on the other hand, nowadays you don't give like the cleaners your item to sell. So it's a little bit of a different relationship. But I think it's interesting to like think about, I don't know, right? Is there like a thing
Yes.
that if you don't pick up from the dry cleaners after a certain amount of time, are they allowed to keep your things?
Yes, they sign it into the contract. Also, trade consignments where a shoemaker or shoe salesperson would sell used shoes, or they would sell off the dry cleaners would sell off clothes. They might also offer used clothes. Was not uncommon in Western countries well into the 20th century. I remember even in
Wow.
Toronto, have shoe stores that would do it whenever retro fashions came back. So if you still had 70 shoes in your closet, you could sell it by the shoemaker that deals with the expensive clients and everything, because they're after vintage shoes, and people could make a lot of money. I know somebody paid their whole tuition for for the year selling off their 70 shoes, their mother's 70 shoes.
Wow. Okay. So you see, practical application.
And also, Lynn, do you know that if you don't pick up your clothes after you actually sign 20 days, they have the right to sell it or give it away.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay.
That's correct. It's in the fine print. That's where you always have to check.
Yeah, it's in the fine print. That's right.
Wow. Okay. So you see, so these are very valid cases. Very applicable.
There's a tremendous carryover. If you hear it, and you know anything about the society that you live in, there is a lot of carryover.
Amazing. I love it.
Thank you very much. Oh, but I'll be on an airplane, so next week I won't be able to.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so we'll see you the week after.
That's
right.
Excellent.
Sure.
Get your coat in shul. When they do cleanup for Pesach, they have the right to give it away.
Okay. So that's the case. So then you could take that coat home and use it because, you've already given up your rights after a certain amount of time.
Yeah, that one's included in the fine print in your membership.
But you have to remember, not everybody reads. Not everybody.
They don't. That's what they count on. That's what they count on. And a lot of schools get things like that. No, they don't.
They don't read the fine print. They don't.
No, they don't. They count on that. And in shuls, people have had their coats and things and other things given away to charity, because a lot of shuls give that stuff away to charity, or they'll sell it off, and it's too late.
Wow.
And I never got over being called a thief by a man who I was teaching in a shul, because I thought, remember we had this discussion, you may help me, I guess. You cannot take things home and read them, even if it takes 3 or 4 months, but I wasn't stealing, but I never forgot that. That just about crushed me.
Oh, that's not nice.
So that was me not have read the fine print. I misunderstood that Orthodox rabbi who said I could do it.
I don't think you're called a thief if you didn't realize. It was inadvertent.
Thank you.
Also, if the rabbi said that's permission, and he's an operative of the shul legally.
Okay, thank you. That was a kind gift, by the way. That was a gift.
All right. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
May we only hear good news. Only good news, everyone. Have a Shabbat Shalom.
Bob is coming.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.